Okie doke. So, welcome to the first video on the data interpretation module. And the idea of this module is to work on our critical faculties, our ability to take a critical attitude to what we read. And plus, of course, deepening our knowledge and understanding from other parts of the course, including the Malthus analysis, the growth, technological change, the data, etc. Okay, and of course, to be critical, ideally, we don't just read stuff and say, well, that's junk. It's more like, okay, we read one thing, we read the other thing, different views on the same question, and then we think about how we can decide which is the best analysis. Okay, and that's what we're doing here. So we're taking basically 4 questions and looking at authors, researchers who take very different views on these questions, comparing what they say, looking at it in terms of what we're doing in the course. Okay, but these videos are going to be very short. Okay, the onus in this module is really on you to do reading and thinking, and then there's going to be group work. Okie doke. I'm just going to pause there for a second. Okay, so before we get into the 4 topics, we're just going to have a quick think about why we can have such different interpretations of the world. Okay, and obviously one reason is that there's a lot of uncertainty out there. Like, we don't perfectly know all the data, and we definitely don't know what that data is telling us about the future. We can, of course, if we know the data up to now very well, we can extrapolate trends, but obviously that's super naive because trends don't necessarily carry on the way they've always done. We need to actually understand what's going on. Okay. And different researchers or different people come up with very different understandings of what's going on, very different predictions for the future. How do we understand how people come up with these different interpretations, different predictions, different understandings? That's a kind of a sociological question, right? And I'm not a sociologist, but still, I learned this stuff, cultural theory and the myths of nature. I learned this about 25 years ago. I find it super interesting. So I'm just going to show this to you, but with the sort of caveat that, you know, I'm not guaranteeing that this is, there would be a lot of other things I could have shown you if we'd had a sociologist doing this. They would have probably shown you something else, but this is just one idea. Okay, cultural theory and the 4 myths of nature. So cultural theory was pioneered by someone called Mary Douglas, and in this theory we categorize people along 2 dimensions, and this is in my words. Okay, the 1 dimension is the degree to which they're bounded into peer groups, and the 2nd dimension is the degree to which they and their peer groups effectively are bounded by external forces. Okay, so if you're unbounded by peer groups, you're basically a sort of quite individualistic, you're on your own, kind of. Okay, you're not in a tight-knit large group. If you're bounded, you are in such a group. Okay, if you're unbounded by external forces, then you or your group are quite free to do what you want. You have a lot of autonomy, you have a lot of power, okay, to choose different options and so on. If you're bounded by external forces, then you don't have as much power to choose. Okay. And then we can have four sort of extreme categories, or depending on these four things, if you're bounded, or unbounded, or bounded, unbounded, we get four categories, right? And very roughly, if you're unbounded both by external forces and by your peers, you're like the businessman, the free marketeer. Okay. If you're bounded by your peers but unbounded by external forces, you're in quite an autonomous sort of commune or something. You're in a sort of communal group that has a lot of autonomy as a group, but you don't have a lot of autonomy within that group. If you're bounded by external forces and by your peers, then you're like the bureaucrat or something. Okay, you're the sort of government agent, or you might even be someone in like a very hierarchical system, like a caste system in India, or even a class system in the UK. But you're part of a strong group within that system. If you're unbounded by your peers but bounded by external forces, then you might be in that kind of very hierarchical system, but you're sort of on your own. Okay, so you could be a peasant farmer with very weak networks and so on. Okay, so if we just take this framework, like I said, there would be a lot of other, and I'm sure more modern frameworks for looking at these kind of questions. But if we just take this framework for what it is, how might this, depending on where you are in this grid or in this matrix, how might this affect your attitude to data and interpretation of that data about the world, sustainability, the environment? Okay. So this was Mary Douglas, this picture, and this one is, oh, I forgot his first name, Michael Thompson, interpreting this stuff and putting it into more of an environmental context. And he said, well, if you're the peasant farmer with very weak networks, then your view of nature tends to be that it's capricious. There's nothing we can do. Okay, it's just random. Sometimes there's these hailstorms, everything gets wrecked. Sometimes there's a terrible frost, everything gets wrecked. Sometimes there's a good season. We just have to like pray to God or whatever and hope for the best. But if we're this hierarchical type instead, then we tend to think that nature is perverse tolerant, according to Thompson, which is basically we need to manage things to keep the ball within this safe operating zone for humanity. Oh, where did I get that phrase from? But if we screw up too badly, we'll go off the edge, over the tipping point, and everything will collapse. Okay, so that's the hierarchical view. The free marketeer is like, it'll all be fine. You know, nature is benign, it's resilient. Even if we screw up a bit, we'll get back to here, it'll all be fine, we'll sort it out. Okay. And of course, the communard, this might be sort of extinction rebellion or something. They're like, whoa, you know, we have to be so careful here. The slightest thing we do wrong, we can just go off the edge. Okay, so in a way, these two, the difference is the depth of this depression, right? In the picture here, there's no depression at all, which is obviously incredibly, that's very extreme, right? But if we have a very small depression, it's like, okay, we just have to be so careful. The earth is in this very special state, and we could just completely wreck things at any moment. Okay. Okie doke. So that's Thompson's Myths of Nature, which you can see in the book if you like. So imagine you adhere to one of the above myths of nature. How would you tend to interpret data about, for instance, future risks caused by climate change? Okay. And of course, when there's a lot of uncertainty, as I was touched on earlier, there's a lot of scope for different views. And we know there is a lot of uncertainty about the future risks from climate change. Okay. If we go above 2 degrees, will society collapse or not? Some people think there's a significant risk, others think it's overblown. Okay. We don't know. Okay. And as I said, here we've got the sort of free marketeers. It's like, oh, it's all fine. Here, this is like the typical researchers, economists. We make our living out of this stuff. It's like finding this sort of safe operating space, if you like. This would be the sort of really die-hard sort of environmental campaigners or whatever. And this might be the relatively uninterested general public who's just like people who aren't the members of the general public who aren't interested in climate change and just see it as like, oh, it'll be what it'll be. We don't know. It's probably just random variation. Or, we just don't know. Okay. So that's just a bit of fun, really, to get you thinking a little bit about what can lie behind people's different views. Okay. And I think I'm going to stop there. Let me just check. Yeah. And then we're going to get into the 4 topics, which are natural resource scarcity, population, growth and poverty, and planetary systems. And then I'm going to take you through your task before the class next Friday.